Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. In the dim light of an English meadow in 1215, a moment unfolded that would echo across the centuries. Surrounded by rebellious barons and under immense pressure, King John of England pressed his seal onto a parchment that would alter the balance of power forever. That document was the Magna Carta, Latin for Great Charter, and though it was born out of a local political crisis between a monarch and his nobles, its impact would ripple through time. This was not a grand declaration of human rights, as we think of them today. Rather, it was a practical, often specific list of grievances and demands meant to curb the king's overreach. Yet within it lay a revolutionary seed, the idea that even the sovereign must follow the law. It set a precedent that rulers were not above justice, a radical notion for the medieval world. Over 800 years later, the principles embedded in the Magna Carta, such as due process, trial by jury, and the limitation of absolute power, continue to form the bedrock of modern democracies. From the U.S. Constitution to global human rights charters, its legacy endures, reminding us that the rule of law is not just a political ideal, but a safeguard of freedom. The Magna Carta was signed, or more accurately, sealed, on June 15, 1215, at Runnymede, a meadow beside the River Thames in England. It came at a time of crisis. King John, facing rebellion from powerful barons fed up with his heavy taxation and arbitrary rule, was forced into negotiations. The result was a 63-clause document that laid out specific demands, protections, and limitations on royal authority. Over time, this medieval agreement gained almost mythical status, often hailed as the foundation of freedom and the birth of constitutional government. But was it truly a step toward democracy? Or simply a power struggle between elites? King John didn't sign it out of principle. He was cornered. The kingdom was in turmoil, and civil war loomed. Agreeing to the charter was a political tactic, not a moral awakening. And yet, what began as a peace treaty between a king and his barons eventually transcended its moment. While many of its original clauses were specific to feudal concerns, a few, like the right to a fair trial, carried timeless implications. This episode explores how the Magna Carta helped inspire the U.S. Constitution, influenced legal systems worldwide, and continues to shape our understanding of rights, justice, and the limits of power. Before the Magna Carta could even be imagined, England under King John was teetering on the edge of chaos. John, the youngest, son of Henry II, inherited a powerful but unstable kingdom. From the start, his reign, 1199 to 1216, was marked by failure and friction. One of his greatest missteps was his disastrous military campaign in France, where he lost Normandy and other crucial territories, lands that had been under English control for generations. These defeats weren't just humiliating, they were costly. To fund his efforts to reclaim the lost lands, John imposed heavy and increasingly arbitrary taxes on his barons and the church. The financial pressure wasn't the only problem. John clashed fiercely with Pope Innocent III over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. At one point, the Pope excommunicated him and placed England under interdict, essentially cutting off the kingdom from the spiritual lifeline of the Catholic Church. Meanwhile, his relationship with the barons, the powerful landowners who were supposed to be his allies, grew more toxic. John ignored their feudal rights, seized their lands without cause, and used royal justice as a tool of oppression. His rule became known for cruelty, greed, and unchecked authority. By 1215, the tension had reached its breaking point. A group of rebel barons, fed up with tyranny and emboldened by John's military failures, took action. They raised armies, captured London, and forced the king to the negotiating table. England was on the brink of civil war, and it was under this intense pressure that the idea of the Magna Carta was born, not as a grand vision of democracy, but as a desperate truce in a kingdom unraveling. The road to Runnymede was paved with rebellion, resentment, and the looming threat of civil war. By early 1215, the barons had reached their limit. Fueled by King John's relentless taxation, abuse of power, and military failures, they banded together in open revolt. Their demands weren't abstract ideals. They wanted tangible limits on royal authority and the restoration of their traditional rights. In May of that year, the barons took the bold step of capturing London, the political and economic heart of the kingdom. This was a major blow to John's control and left him with few options. With his authority crumbling and his military position weakened, John was forced to negotiate. The chosen meeting place was Runnymede, a water meadow by the River Thames, situated between Windsor Castle, a royal stronghold, and Staines, where the rebel barons were encamped. Its location made it a neutral ground, symbolic of compromise, yet charged with tension. On June 15, 1215, under the watchful eye of armed barons and clergy, King John affixed his seal to a document that would later be known as the Magna Carta. But John didn't do so willingly. He saw the charter as a temporary concession, a way to buy time and stave off rebellion. In truth, he had no intention of honoring it for long. Still, in that moment, power shifted. For the first time in English history, a monarch was publicly forced to submit to the rule of law, setting in motion a legacy that would stretch far beyond the fields of Runnymede. The Magna Carta, sealed in 1215, contains 63 clauses, but only a few have stood the test of time and held real influence in shaping modern law and liberty. Despite its legendary status, it was never meant to be a declaration of democracy. It was a peace treaty between an unpopular king and his rebellious barons. Still, several clauses planted the seeds of legal principles we recognize today. Key clauses that mattered: protection from illegal imprisonment. One of the most famous ideas is found in Clause 39, which essentially states that no free man shall be imprisoned or punished without the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. This is the early root of habeas corpus, the right to challenge unlawful detention in court. Right to a fair trial. Building on the same idea, the Magna Carta emphasized due process. Even a king could not simply jail someone arbitrarily. Trials had to be fair and follow legal procedure. Limits on taxation without consent. Clause 12 declared that the king could not impose or collect certain taxes, scutage, or aid without the consent of his council, essentially the barons. This idea would eventually evolve into the principle of no taxation without representation, a rallying cry for future revolutions. Freedom of the Church. The charter opened with a bold statement: "The English Church shall be free." This was largely to secure support from the Pope and clergy, but it laid groundwork for the later principle of religious liberty. What the Magna Carta did not do. Despite its fame, the Magna Carta did not establish voting rights, democracy, or universal freedoms. No voting rights. The barons weren't interested in empowering the general population. The charter protected the privileges of a narrow elite, landholding nobles, not peasants or commoners. No universal equality. Rights granted by the Magna Carta applied mainly to free men. Most people in medieval England, especially serfs and women, were excluded. In short, the Magna Carta didn't create democracy, but it introduced an enduring idea that no one, not even the king, is above the law. And that idea would prove revolutionary in the centuries to come. While the Magna Carta was sealed in June 1215, its impact was not immediate, at least not in the way history would later present it. After signing the document, King John wasted little time in trying to backtrack on his agreement. Within weeks, he sought the support of Pope Innocent III, who was a powerful figure at the time. The Pope annulled the Magna Carta, declaring it unlawful and arguing that it had been forced upon John by his barons under duress. With the Pope's blessing, John disregarded the charter, which ignited a violent backlash. The First Barons' War, 1215-1217, soon broke out, as the barons rebelled once again, now armed with the charter as a symbol of their struggle for their rights. The conflict was marked by sporadic battles, shifting allegiances, and political instability. The barons, though initially successful, were not able to maintain momentum against the king's forces. The war came to an end with the death of King John in 1216. His successor, Henry III, was only 9 years old at the time, and his regents recognized that the kingdom needed stability. One of their first actions was to reissue the Magna Carta in 1216, this time with some modifications. The revised version reaffirmed many of the key clauses, though it was no longer the full revolutionary document that the barons had hoped for. Instead, it was largely seen as a temporary measure to ensure peace during Henry III's minority. Over the next several decades, the Magna Carta slowly became more embedded in English political life, but not in the radical way we might expect from its later reputation. It was not until the 13th and 14th centuries, during the reigns of later monarchs like Edward I, that the principles laid out in the Magna Carta were consistently enforced or interpreted as foundational to constitutional law. Though the Magna Carta began as a specific agreement between a medieval king and his rebellious barons, its long-term legacy far outgrew its original context. Over the centuries, the document evolved into a powerful symbol of liberty, justice, and resistance to tyranny, used in ways that its authors could never have imagined. Influence on English common law. Many of the Magna Carta's ideas became embedded in English common law, especially clauses concerning due process, property rights, and limitations on arbitrary authority. The principle that even the monarch must obey the law became foundational. Judges and legal scholars repeatedly referenced the charter in later legal disputes, helping to entrench the idea that no one, not even the king, is above the law. The English Civil War during the 17th century, as tensions escalated between Parliament and King Charles I, opponents of royal absolutism reached back to the Magna Carta as a precedent. Parliamentarians cited the document in their arguments against unlawful taxation and imprisonment, portraying it as a historic guarantee of English freedoms. This helped fuel the English Civil War, 1642-1651, and ultimately led to the execution of Charles III and a brief Republican period under Oliver Cromwell. American Revolution and U.S. Constitution across the Atlantic. American revolutionaries in the 18th century also drew inspiration from the Magna Carta. Colonists, frustrated by what they saw as violations of their rights by the British Crown, pointed to the Charter's principles of due process and consent to taxation. The Declaration of Independence, 1776, and later the U.S. Constitution, 1787, especially the Bill of Rights, reflected Magna Carta's ideals, such as fair trials, checks on executive power, and the right to private property, a symbol for activism by the 19th and 20th centuries. The Magna Carta had become a universal symbol of human rights and legal fairness. Suffragists fighting for women's right to vote, abolitionists opposing slavery, and civil rights leaders demanding racial equality all referenced the document. Its name and legacy were invoked to lend moral and historical weight to these struggles, even though the original 1215 Charter did not mention equality in the modern sense. In effect, the Magna Carta was reborn many times, used and reinterpreted, to meet the demands of each generation. It became less about the medieval context and more about the enduring idea that freedom must be protected by law. Despite its legendary reputation, the Magna Carta was not a democratic document, at least, not in its original form. One of the biggest myths is that it laid the foundation for modern democracy at the time it was written. In truth, it was a pragmatic peace treaty between King John and a group of powerful barons who were angry about his abuses of power. The Charter primarily protected the interests of the nobility, not ordinary people. It dealt with things like feudal obligations, inheritance rights, and land ownership, issues that affected wealthy landowners, not the common population. There was no mention of voting rights, equality under the law, or universal civil liberties. Women, peasants, and anyone without noble status were entirely excluded from its protections. What transformed the Magna Carta over time was not the document itself, but how later generations reinterpreted it. Legal scholars, politicians, and activists reimagined its clauses, especially those about due process and limits on arbitrary rule, as the seeds of broader freedoms. It evolved into a powerful symbol, not because it was born democratic, but because it was claimed and repurposed by those seeking justice and accountability. So while the Magna Carta may not have started as a blueprint for liberty, its mythic afterlife helped shape the very ideas of freedom and rule of law that define democracies today. Today, over 800 years after it was first sealed, the Magna Carta continues to hold symbolic and legal weight around the world. Modern courts, especially in countries with legal systems rooted in English common law like the US, Canada, and Australia, still cite the Magna Carta as a foundational reference for principles such as due process, trial by jury, and limits on government power. While its specific clauses are no longer law, the spirit of the document, that no one is above the law, remains a cornerstone of constitutional governance. In recognition of its lasting importance, the Magna Carta was added to the UNESCO Memory of the World Register, placing it alongside the world's most important documentary heritage. Its inclusion signals that this medieval document has had a profound and enduring global impact, shaping democratic ideals and legal frameworks across centuries. Original copies of the Magna Carta are still on public display, most famously at the British Library in London, Salisbury Cathedral, and Lincoln Cathedral. These fragile parchments draw thousands of visitors every year, not just for their historical significance, but for what they represent. The idea that power must have limits, and that even rulers are bound by law. The Magna Carta may be ancient, but its message continues to echo through modern institutions and legal systems. Conclusion and call to action. From a reluctant king sealing a charter under duress to a global symbol of liberty and justice, the Magna Carta's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. It wasn't originally a declaration of democracy, but over centuries, it evolved into a beacon for the rule of law and civil rights. It influenced revolutions, inspired constitutions, and continues to shape our understanding of justice today. As historian Nicholas Vincent once said, the Magna Carta is not just a medieval relic, it's a living reminder that power must be accountable. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think the Magna Carta deserves its legendary status? Let us know in the comments. And if you're hungry for more untold history, check out our deep dive on the Glorious Revolution or the English Civil War, moments that further shaped the path toward modern democracy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another history deep dive.